Ethan Caldwell ripped the divorce papers out of Olivia's hands, slammed them down on the table so hard the water glasses jumped and jabbed a finger in her face. "Sign it and get out. You were nothing when I met you, and you'll be nothing when I'm done." He grabbed her wrist, shoved the pen into her fingers, and sneered, "8 years of charity, Olivia. That's what our marriage was." He was so busy humiliating her, he never noticed the sealed envelope in her lap. The envelope proving she now owned the $150 billion empire that signed his paycheck. His new boss. Before we go further, if a story about arrogance meeting its reckoning is the kind of story you love, take 1 second right now to subscribe and follow this channel because it truly helps more than you know. Stay with me all the way to the end because the ending will surprise you. And do me one small favor. Comment the name of the city you are watching from right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled around the world. Now let's begin. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the law firm smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long and cologne that cost more than most people's rent. Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair like a man who had already won because in his mind, he had. He had rehearsed this morning for weeks. He had imagined the moment his wife would finally understand that the comfortable life she had enjoyed was a gift he had chosen to give her, and now he was choosing to take it away. Across the table sat Olivia Bennett, quiet, composed, her hands folded neatly over a plain manila envelope she had brought with her and set beside her purse. She had not raised her voice once during the entire proceeding. She had not cried, not begged, not asked him to reconsider. And somehow that stillness annoyed Ethan more than any argument could have. "You could at least look upset," Ethan said, tapping the table with 2 fingers. 8 years, Olivia. You could show a little something." Olivia lifted her eyes to him slowly. "What would you like me to show you, Ethan?" "Anything," he said, spreading his hands. "Regret, fear, the realization that you're about to walk out of this building with nothing. Most women in your position would be terrified." His lawyer, a sharp man named Grant with slick hair and a slicker manner, gave a small warning cough. "Ethan," he murmured, "let's just finish the paperwork." But Ethan wasn't listening. He rarely listened. That had always been the problem, though he had never once considered it a problem. He considered it decisiveness. "I want her to understand what she's losing," Ethan continued. "The apartment, the lifestyle, the name Caldwell, which actually means something in this city." He turned back to Olivia. "You do understand, don't you? You spent 8 years living inside my success, and now you get to find out what the world looks like without me carrying you." Olivia's lawyer, a calm older woman named Diane Foster, set down her pen. "Mr. Caldwell, my client has been more than generous in these negotiations. She's asked for nothing except a clean and quiet separation." "That's because she has nothing to ask for," Ethan said, and he actually laughed. "She has no career. No real income, no ambition. She sat at home for 8 years while I built something. Isn't that right, Olivia? Tell them what you did all day." The room went uncomfortably quiet. Grant shifted in his seat. Diane's jaw tightened. But Olivia didn't flinch. "I supported you," Olivia said simply. Ethan laughed again, harder this time. "Supported me, right, by making coffee and listening to my calls. That's not support, Olivia, that's decoration." Something flickered behind Olivia's eyes just for a second, and then it was gone. She reached out and rested her hand gently on the manila envelope beside her. She didn't open it. She just held it the way a person holds something they are not quite ready to let go of. "You have no idea who I am," Olivia said quietly. "You never did." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Here we go, the mysterious wife act. You're a homemaker from a modest family, Olivia. Your grandmother lived in some old house upstate. You went to a state school, there's no mystery. I married down, and I've made my peace with it, and now I'm correcting the mistake." Diane's hand curled into a fist on the tabletop. Even Grant looked away, embarrassed for his own client. But Olivia only nodded slowly, as if she were absorbing an insult she had absorbed 1,000 times before. Because she had. She remembered the first time Ethan had said something like that. It was 5 years earlier, at a company dinner, when he had introduced her to his boss, not as his wife, but as "My Olivia, she keeps the home running." She had smiled that night. She had let it go. She had told herself he was nervous that he wanted to impress the executives, that he didn't mean it the way it sounded. She had told herself a lot of things over 8 years. "Sign the papers," Ethan said again, softer now, almost coaxing the way a man speaks to a child. "It's better for both of us. You'll find your footing. Maybe get a little job, something simple, and I'll finally have room to breathe." Olivia picked up the pen. Ethan watched her with satisfaction. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment the quiet woman finally accepted her place. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes bright with something close to triumph. Olivia signed her name. Clean, steady, no hesitation. She slid the papers back across the table. "There," she said. "You're free." Ethan exhaled like a man who had just finished lifting something heavy. "Good. Finally. See, that wasn't so hard, was it?" He gathered the documents, straightened them against the table, and handed them to Grant. "Make copies. I want everything filed by end of day." He stood buttoning his jacket, already halfway out of the conversation and into his next meeting. He glanced down at Olivia one last time, and for a moment, something almost like pity crossed his face. "You know," he said, "I did love you, in the beginning, before I realized we wanted different things." He paused. "You wanted to be small. I wanted to be great." Olivia looked up at him, and for the first time all morning she smiled. It was not a bitter smile. It was not an angry smile. It was something far worse for Ethan, though he was too blind to see it. It was the smile of a person who knows something you don't. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said. He didn't hear the strange note in her voice. He didn't notice the way Diane Foster was watching him with an expression that hovered somewhere between disbelief and quiet horror. He didn't notice anything because Ethan Caldwell had never once in his life noticed anything that didn't directly serve him. He walked out of the room feeling 10 pounds lighter and 20 years younger. He had won. He was certain of it. He rode the elevator down 42 floors, humming to himself, planning the rest of his life. A new apartment, a younger woman on his arm at the next company gala, a promotion he was sure was coming because his boss had all but promised it. Everything was falling into place. Behind him in the conference room, Olivia sat still for a long moment after the door closed. Diane Foster reached over and touched her arm. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Olivia said. "You didn't have to sit through that. I could have ended the meeting." "I know." Olivia looked down at the manila envelope in her hands. "But I wanted to remember exactly who he was. On the record, in front of witnesses. I wanted there to be no confusion later about what kind of man he is." Diane studied her client carefully. In 30 years of family law, she had seen women crushed by this exact moment. She had seen them shattered, hollowed out, terrified of a future they didn't know how to face. But Olivia Bennett was not shattered. Olivia Bennett looked like a woman standing at the very beginning of something. "Olivia," Diane said slowly, "I've handled your divorce, but I confess I still don't understand the full picture. When you first came to me, you told me the financial situation was about to change dramatically. You told me not to fight for the apartment, not to fight for anything." She paused. "You said within a week it wouldn't matter." Olivia opened the manila envelope at last. Inside was a single letter written in careful handwriting on cream-colored paper, and beneath it a stack of legal documents bearing the seal of a law firm far more powerful than the one they were sitting in. "My grandmother passed 3 days ago," Olivia said quietly. Diane's face softened. "I'm so sorry. You never mentioned." "I didn't tell Ethan either. He didn't know she was sick. He never asked about my family." Olivia ran her thumb along the edge of the letter. "He met my grandmother exactly twice in 8 years. The first time he spent the entire dinner checking his phone. The second time he called her house, and I quote, quaint." A small, sad laugh escaped her. "Quaint. What did your grandmother leave you?" Diane asked gently, assuming it was a house, a savings account, something modest, the kind of inheritance that helps a newly single woman get back on her feet. Olivia slid the legal documents across the table. Diane began to read. Her expression didn't change at first. Then it did. Her eyes moved down the page, and then back up to the top, and then down again, as if she couldn't quite trust what she was seeing. "Olivia," Diane whispered. "Yes." "This says," Diane stopped, started again. "This says you're the sole heir to the Bennett Global Real Estate Group." "Yes?" The Bennett Global Real Estate Group is. Diane's voice failed her for a moment. She was a woman who negotiated 8-figure settlements without breaking a sweat. She had faced down billionaires across conference tables, and she could not finish her sentence. $150 billion, Olivia said calmly, give or take depending on the quarter. Diane set the papers down very slowly, as if they might burn her. Your grandmother, she said. Your grandmother who lived in the old house upstate, the one Ethan called quaint. Margaret Bennett, Olivia said. She built the company from a single property in 1961. She spent 60 years growing it into one of the largest privately held real estate empires in the country, and she did it all while letting the world believe she was just a sweet old woman who liked her garden. Olivia's eyes shone. She used to tell me the moment people think you're harmless, they show you exactly who they are. Diane sat back in her chair, stunned into silence. There's more, Olivia said. How could there possibly be more? Olivia flipped to a page near the back of the document and turned it so Diane could read the highlighted section. It listed the company's major holdings, commercial towers across a dozen states, luxury developments, shopping centers. And there in the middle of the list, a name that made Diane's breath catch, Crestwood International Properties. Diane looked up sharply. Isn't that? Ethan's company, Olivia said. Yes, the company he spent his entire career climbing, the company he thinks made him great. She closed the folder gently. Bennett Global acquired a controlling interest in Crestwood 4 years ago. My grandmother kept it quiet. She kept everything quiet. She wanted to watch how the executives behaved when they didn't know who was watching. The room was silent for a long moment. He works for you, Diane finally said. Ethan works for you. As of this moment, you are functionally his boss's boss's boss. As of 3 days ago, Olivia corrected softly. I just needed the divorce finalized first. I didn't want a single dollar of that company entangled in this marriage. I didn't want him touching any of it, not 1 cent. Diane let out a long, slow breath. Olivia, do you understand what you could do to him? He just sat here and humiliated you in front of 2 attorneys. He called you decoration. He said you wanted to be small, and you could destroy his entire career with a single phone call. Olivia was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but there was something heavy underneath it. My grandmother left me a letter, too, she said. Do you want to know what it says? Diane nodded. Olivia unfolded the cream-colored paper and read aloud, her voice trembling only slightly. My dear Olivia, by now you know the truth about what I built and what I'm leaving in your hands. I hid it from the world for a reason. Power reveals people. When a man believes you have nothing, he shows you everything. I suspect you have already learned this from the man you married. I watched him at my dinner table. I saw how he looked at you. I said nothing because it was not my lesson to teach. It was yours to learn. But now the choice is yours, my darling. You hold enough power to burn his whole world to the ground. I will not tell you what to do with it. I will only tell you this. Power does not reveal who you are. It reveals who you choose to become. Choose carefully. Choose better than he did. All my love always. Grandmother. Olivia folded the letter and pressed it to her chest for a moment. A single tear slid down her cheek and she wiped it away without embarrassment. Diane was quiet, moved despite herself. She sounds like an extraordinary woman. She was, Olivia said. She saw everything. She saw him for exactly what he was years before I let myself admit it. She looked down at the divorce papers still sitting on the table, the ones Ethan had signed with such glee. He thinks he threw me away this morning. He thinks he won. What are you going to do? Diane asked. Olivia stood gathering her things with quiet grace. I'm going to go home. And tomorrow, I'm going to walk into a company I now own, and I'm going to find out who among them is worth saving. She paused at the door. Including him. Especially him. She left the conference room with her head high. Meanwhile, 42 floors below and half a city away, Ethan Caldwell was already celebrating. He had gone straight from the law office to a restaurant where the tables cost a small fortune to reserve, and he had ordered a bottle of wine older than his marriage. Across from him sat a colleague named Marcus, a fellow director who laughed at all his jokes and never challenged his opinions, which was exactly why Ethan liked him. "To freedom," Ethan said, raising his glass. "To freedom," Marcus echoed. "So it's really done the divorce." Signed, sealed, delivered. Ethan took a long sip. She didn't even fight it. Didn't ask for a thing, which tells you everything you need to know. A woman with no leverage, no options, no fire. 8 years I carried her, Marcus. 8 years. Marcus nodded along. You did the right thing. A man in your position needs a partner who elevates him, not someone holding him back. Exactly. Ethan set his glass down. And between us, I've heard rumblings about the senior executive position opening up. Reynolds is retiring in the spring. My name's been mentioned. More than mentioned. He smiled. Everything's finally lining up. New role, new life, no dead weight. You've earned it, Marcus said. And that phrase, "you've earned it," would echo in Ethan's mind many times in the months to come in ways he could not yet imagine. Because Ethan Caldwell was certain, absolutely certain, that everything he had was earned. Every promotion, every strategy, every clever idea he had presented in a boardroom to nodding executives. He had no idea how many of those ideas had not come from him at all. He would learn. Oh, he would learn. That evening, Ethan returned to the apartment that would soon be entirely his. He poured himself a drink, kicked off his shoes, and wandered through the rooms feeling like a king surveying his kingdom. He passed the small desk in the corner of the living room where Olivia used to sit for hours, and he barely gave it a glance. He had never once asked what she did there. If he had asked, she might have told him. She might have told him that she read every industry report Crestwood published, that she understood commercial real estate cycles better than half the men in his office, that when he came home stressed about a stalled development deal and she asked her quiet questions and made her gentle suggestions, she was doing something far more valuable than making conversation. She was solving his problems. She was giving him the exact strategies he would present the next morning as his own brilliant insights. But Ethan never asked. So Ethan never knew. He remembered one night in particular, though he remembered it wrong the way arrogant men always remember things wrong. It had been 2 years ago. He had come home nearly in a panic. A major deal, a 40-story development, was collapsing. The numbers didn't work. His team had spent a week trying to restructure the financing and had gotten nowhere. If the deal died, it would be Ethan's name attached to the failure. He had paced the living room cursing when Olivia had looked up from her desk and asked in that soft way of hers, "What if you're structuring it as a single-phase project when it should be phased?" Ethan had waved her off. "You don't understand these things, Olivia." But she had kept going gently, patiently. If you phase the development into 3 stages, you reduce the upfront capital requirement. You bring in early revenue from Phase 1 to fund Phase 2. The bank stops seeing one enormous risk and starts seeing 3 manageable ones. And you can restructure the debt around each phase. Ethan had stopped pacing. He hadn't said thank you. He hadn't even acknowledged that the idea came from her. But the next morning he had walked into his boss's office and presented his phased development strategy with total confidence. The deal had been saved. Ethan had received a bonus. His boss had called him one of the sharpest strategic minds in the company. And Olivia had said nothing. She had only smiled quietly at the dinner table when he told her the good news and let him believe it was all his own doing. She had done this dozens of times over 8 years. The affordable housing initiative he was praised for, hers. The idea to convert a failing shopping center into mixed-use residential, hers. The negotiating strategy that landed the biggest lease in the company's regional history. Hers whispered to him over morning coffee delivered by him at noon to a standing ovation. Ethan had built a career on borrowed brilliance and never once suspected it, because he had never once considered that the quiet woman across the table might be smarter than him. It simply never occurred to him. It was not part of the story he told himself about the world. That was the trap he had built for himself, and it was about to spring shut. The next morning, Olivia Bennett woke before dawn. She sat at the kitchen table of a modest apartment, not the luxury place Ethan lived in, but a smaller one she had quietly rented 3 weeks earlier, preparing for a life she knew was coming. She had a cup of tea in front of her and her grandmother's letter beside it, and she read it one more time in the gray morning light. Power does not reveal who you are. It reveals who you choose to become. She thought about this man she had married. She thought about the boy he must have been once before. Ambition curdled into arrogance before he learned to measure his worth by looking down on other people. She thought about the way he had looked at her yesterday, so sure of himself, so certain she was beneath him. And she thought about the terrible, thrilling power now resting in her hands. She could call the board of Crestwood International today. She could have Ethan Caldwell removed from the building by security before lunch. She could make sure his name became poison in every real estate firm in the country. She could take the promotion he was dreaming of and hand it to someone he had stepped on to climb. She could do all of it legally cleanly with the stroke of a pen. The thought was sweet. She would not pretend otherwise. There is a part of every wounded person that longs to be understood, and there is no understanding quite as complete as watching the person who dismissed you realize at last exactly what they threw away. But then she heard her grandmother's voice again. Not from the letter, from memory. From 100 afternoons in the garden, from 1,000 quiet lessons. Anyone can destroy Olivia. Any fool with power can destroy. The rare ones, the ones worth becoming, they build. They lift. They see the value in people that other people miss. That is the only kind of power worth having. Olivia set down the letter. She was not going to make her decision today. She was going to walk into that company, and she was going to look at it clearly with her grandmother's eyes, and she was going to find out the truth about it. Not the truth Ethan told himself. The real truth. Who was talented and overlooked? Who was toxic and protected? Who deserved to rise and who deserved to fall? And somewhere in the middle of all of it was her ex-husband, a man who had spent 8 years failing to see her about to be seen by her more clearly than he had ever been seen in his life. She got dressed. Not in anything flashy, a simple navy suit. Nothing that announced power. Her grandmother had taught her that too. The people who need to announce their power rarely have very much of it. At the door, she paused and looked at her own reflection. Choose better than he did, she said softly to herself, to her grandmother, to the woman she was about to become. Then she walked out into the morning. Across the city, Ethan Caldwell was also getting ready, though he was getting ready for a very different day than the one he imagined. He stood in front of his mirror, adjusting a tie that cost more than some people's monthly salary, and he smiled at himself, pleased with what he saw. A man in his prime, a man on the rise, a man who had just cut loose the last thing holding him back. Today's a good day, he told his reflection. Big things coming. He had heard the chairwoman of the parent company was visiting the office today. Some new owner, apparently. Word had come down that the leadership of Bennett Global had changed hands, that the old founder had passed, and someone new was taking over. Ethan hadn't paid much attention to the details. Ownership changes never affected him directly, he figured. He was too valuable. He was untouchable. Still, it wouldn't hurt to make a good impression on the new boss. He decided he would find a way to introduce himself, show his leadership, demonstrate exactly why he deserved that senior executive role. New ownership might even mean new opportunities. He should position himself early, get in front of the right person. Yes, he murmured, straightening his jacket. Make an impression on the new chairwoman. Smart. He had no idea he had already made an impression on her. He had made it 8 years' worth of impressions. He had made it just yesterday across a conference table when he called her decoration. Ethan grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door, whistling a man walking straight toward the reckoning he had built for himself, one arrogant word at a time. He felt invincible. He felt like the whole city belonged to him. He felt like nothing could touch him. And as he stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close on his reflection, he had exactly one thought, the thought of a man who had spent his entire life underestimating the very people who held his fate in their hands. He thought, this is going to be the best day of my life. He was wrong. He was so completely, catastrophically wrong. But he would not learn how wrong until he walked onto the executive floor, until the room fell silent, until a woman in a simple navy suit stepped up to the front and opened her mouth to speak. He would not learn how wrong until he recognized the shape of her, the set of her shoulders, the quiet steel in her eyes that he had seen just yesterday and dismissed as weakness. He would not learn until it was far, far too late to take back a single word. Olivia Bennett arrived at the tower that housed Crestwood International Properties at 9 o'clock sharp. She did not go through the main entrance where the executives came and went. She went in through the side quietly, the way her grandmother always had, and she stood for a moment in the lobby watching the people flow past her. Employees rushing to meetings, assistants carrying coffee, interns clutching folders. Not one of them knew who she was. Not one of them looked twice at the woman in the navy suit standing near the elevators. She liked that. She had always liked being unseen. It was the best vantage point in the world. A young woman near the elevator dropped a stack of papers, and they scattered across the marble floor. Everyone kept walking, everyone except Olivia, who bent down and helped gather them. "Thank you," the young woman said, flustered. "You didn't have to do that. Most people around here wouldn't." "What's your name?" Olivia asked, handing her the papers. "Grace. I'm an analyst, junior analyst." She said it the way people say a thing they are ashamed of. "Your ideas are good, Grace." The young woman blinked, surprised by the question. "I think so, sometimes, but—" She hesitated. "It's hard to get heard around here. There are directors who take your work and put their name on it. You learn to keep your head down." Olivia's expression didn't change, but something inside her went very still and very focused. "Which directors?" she asked. Grace suddenly looked nervous, aware she might have said too much to a stranger. "I shouldn't. I'm sorry. I don't even know who you are." Olivia smiled. "You will," she said gently. "Soon. And when you do, Grace, I want you to come find me. Bring your ideas. All of them. The ones nobody listened to." She stepped into the elevator. "I promise you someone is finally going to listen." The doors closed before Grace could respond, and the young analyst stood there in the lobby holding her papers, staring at the elevator, wondering who on earth that woman had been. Up on the executive floor, the whole leadership team was assembling in the largest conference room, buzzing with speculation about the new owner. Ethan Caldwell arrived early, of course. He positioned himself near the front where the new chairwoman would be sure to see him. He straightened his jacket. He rehearsed his introduction in his head, confident, impressive, memorable. "Ethan Caldwell," he practiced under his breath. "Regional Development Director. Pleasure to finally meet you." Marcus slid into the seat beside him. "Big day, huh, new owner? Everybody's nervous." "Nervous?" Ethan scoffed quietly. "This is opportunity, Marcus. New leadership means new alliances. The people who position themselves now are the people who rise. Watch and learn." "You know anything about this chairwoman?" "Not much. Some heir to the Bennett fortune. Probably some pampered rich kid who inherited a company they don't understand." Ethan smoothed his tie. "Which is perfect for us. People like that need experienced executives to guide them. That's where I come in." Marcus chuckled. "You've got it all figured out." "I always do." At the front of the room, the head of Human Resources tapped a microphone and cleared his throat. The murmuring died down. Every executive in the room straightened, adjusted their jackets, put on their most professional faces. This was the moment they would meet the person who now held all their careers in her hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," the HR director began, "thank you all for gathering on short notice. As many of you have heard, the ownership of our parent company, Bennett Global Real Estate Group, has recently transferred following the passing of our founder, Margaret Bennett." A respectful pause. "Today I have the honor of introducing you to the new chairwoman of Bennett Global, and therefore the ultimate leader of everything under this roof." Ethan leaned forward, ready with his best smile. "Please welcome," the HR director said, "Miss Olivia Bennett." The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. For one absurd second, his brain refused to process it. Olivia Bennett. The words did not fit together. They could not fit together. His Olivia. The woman he had thrown away yesterday. The homemaker. The decoration. The woman with no career and no ambition and no leverage. His mind scrambled to rearrange the pieces. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. There must be another Olivia. There must be some mistake. Bennett was a common enough name, surely. And then the door at the side of the room opened, and she walked in. Olivia. his Olivia, in a simple navy suit, her chin high, her expression calm, walking toward the front of the room with a quiet confidence he had never once seen in her, or perhaps had simply never bothered to look for. The blood drained from Ethan's face. Around him, the executives were applauding politely, murmuring their welcomes, none of them aware of the private catastrophe unfolding in the front row. But Ethan couldn't hear the applause. He couldn't hear anything. There was a roaring in his ears, and underneath it, a single thought repeating over and over like an alarm he could not shut off. "She's the owner. She's the owner. She's the owner." Olivia reached the front of the room. She set a single folder on the podium. And then she lifted her eyes and looked out over the assembled leadership of the company, this room full of powerful people waiting to hear from her, and her gaze moved across them slowly, deliberately, until it landed on Ethan. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply held his gaze for one long, unbearable moment, and in that moment Ethan Caldwell understood with a clarity that hollowed him out from the inside that every word he had ever said to her, every insult, every dismissal, every time he had called her small and himself great, she had heard all of it. She had carried all of it. And now she stood above him, holding a power he had not known existed, and he sat below her, holding nothing but the memory of his own arrogance. His mouth had gone completely dry. Olivia looked away from him out to the rest of the room, and she began to speak. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was steady and clear and carried to every corner of the room. "My name is Olivia Bennett. Some of you may recognize me, most of you don't. That's all right. I've spent most of my life being someone people didn't quite notice." A small pause. "I've learned it's a remarkably useful place to stand. You see things from the places nobody's looking." The room was silent. Rapt. Ethan sat frozen in his chair, his hands cold, his heart hammering, watching the woman he had underestimated for 8 years command a room of executives who a moment ago had been ready to bow to a stranger. "My grandmother built this company from nothing," Olivia continued. "One property in 1961. She grew it into something worth more than most people can imagine, and she did it while letting the world believe she was harmless." Olivia's eyes swept the room again, and for just a fraction of a second, they touched Ethan again, then moved on. "She used to tell me the moment people believe you have nothing, they show you exactly who they are." Somewhere in the room, someone shifted uncomfortably, perhaps more than one person, because there were people in that room, Ethan among them, who had shown Olivia Bennett exactly who they were believing, all the while that she was no one, that she was watching nothing, that she would never be in a position to remember. They had been wrong. "Over the coming weeks," Olivia said, "I'll be meeting with each of you. I'll be reviewing how this company has been run. Not the numbers. The numbers I already know." A faint, knowing smile. "I'll be looking at how people here treat each other, who lifts others up, and who climbs by standing on the people beneath them." The silence in the room had changed. It had a texture now. It had fear in it. And no one in that entire room was more afraid than the man in the front row, the regional development director who had come in that morning certain he was untouchable, the man who had signed his divorce papers with a smile just 24 hours earlier, believing he had won. Ethan Caldwell stared up at his former wife, at the boss he never knew he had, at the woman whose brilliance he had stolen and whose worth he had mocked. And for the first time in his adult life, Ethan Caldwell felt the ground fall away beneath him completely. He had spent 8 years looking down on Olivia Bennett. Now he had to look up, and she was so very, very far above him. Ethan Caldwell did not remember standing up. One moment he was frozen in his chair, and the next he was on his feet, and he could not have said why, except that his body had reacted before his mind could stop it, the way a man flinches from fire. Every head in the room turned toward him. He realized he had made a sound, some kind of strangled noise, and now 40 of the most powerful executives in the company were staring at him, and at the front of the room, Olivia had stopped speaking. She looked at him, calm, patient, the way you look at a child who has interrupted an adult. "Did you have something to add, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked. And there it was, Mr. Caldwell, not Ethan, not the name she had whispered 1,000 times across a pillow. Mr. Caldwell, the way you address a stranger or an employee or a man who no longer means anything to you at all." Ethan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Marcus was tugging at his sleeve, hissing under his breath, "Ethan, sit down! Sit down!" But Ethan couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there while the woman he had thrown away yesterday held the entire room in the palm of her hand and looked at him like he was furniture. "No," Ethan finally managed. His voice cracked on the single word. "No, sorry, continue." He sat. He dropped into his chair so hard it hurt his back, and he stared down at the table, and he could feel the heat crawling up his neck, and he could feel every eye in the room slowly turning away from him, and somehow that was worse than being looked at. Olivia continued as though nothing had happened. "As I was saying," she said, "over the coming weeks I'll be reviewing this company, every division, every decision, and I'll be speaking with each of you personally." She closed the folder on the podium. "Thank you for your time this morning. We'll be in touch." That was it. No grand speech, no threats, no fanfare. She simply gathered her things and walked out of the room. And the strange thing, the thing that terrified Ethan most, was how the entire room seemed to exhale the moment she was gone, as if they had all been holding their breath in the presence of something they didn't fully understand. The executives began filing out, murmuring to each other in low, anxious voices. Ethan sat rooted to his chair. Marcus stayed beside him. "Ethan," Marcus said quietly. "Ethan, what the hell just happened? You looked like you'd seen a ghost." Ethan swallowed. His throat was dry as sand. "That's her," he whispered. "That's who. Olivia." He could barely say it. "Bennett, Olivia Bennett. That's my wife." Marcus laughed, thinking it was a joke. Then he saw Ethan's face, and the laugh died in his throat. "Wait, your wife? The one you just divorced yesterday, the homemaker, the one with no career, no ambition, the decoration." He was throwing Ethan's own words back at him now, and each one landed like a slap. "That woman, that's the woman who now owns the entire company." "Yes," Ethan said. He felt like he might be sick. Marcus sat back slowly. "Ethan," he said, and there was something new in his voice, something careful, something that sounded almost like distance. "You spent 8 years telling everyone your wife did nothing. You told me she was dead weight. You told me you carried her." He paused. "And she owns this company. She's the chairwoman. She's your boss." "I know what she is," Ethan snapped. "Do you?" Marcus stood buttoning his jacket, and for the first time in years, he was not laughing at Ethan's jokes or nodding at Ethan's opinions. He was looking at Ethan the way you look at a man standing on a train track who hasn't yet heard the whistle. "Because from where I'm sitting, you just made the biggest enemy of your entire career, and she doesn't even have to lift a finger. All she has to do is remember." He walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. "And something tells me she remembers everything." Then Marcus was gone too, and Ethan Caldwell was alone in the empty conference room, staring at the podium where his ex-wife had just stood as the most powerful person in the building. 3 minutes. That was how long it had taken. 3 minutes for the world he had built to reveal itself as a lie. He replayed the divorce hearing in his mind, and now every second of it was poison. Sign it and get out. You were nothing when I met you. 8 years of charity. He had said those things. He had said them believing she was powerless, believing there would never be consequences, believing the story he told himself that he was the strong one, the successful one, the one who mattered, and she had sat there and let him say it. She had signed the papers. She had said, "There, you're free," and she had walked out. She knew. She knew the entire time. She had already inherited the company. She had already become his boss. And she had sat across that table and let him hang himself with his own words in front of witnesses on the record. The realization made his stomach turn. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't bad luck. This was a woman who had known exactly what she held in her hands and had chosen deliberately to let him show the whole world who he really was before she revealed who she really was. His grandmother's harmless routine, Ethan thought suddenly, though he didn't know why the thought came. He had never met Margaret Bennett more than twice. He had called her house quaint. He had checked his phone through dinner, and that old woman, that sweet, quaint old woman, had been sitting on $150 billion, watching him, judging him, seeing him for exactly what he was. They had all seen him. Ethan pressed his palms against his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt genuinely cold to the bone, afraid. That afternoon, the fear got worse. An email went out to the entire company. It came from the office of the chairwoman. It was brief and it was polite, and it landed in every inbox like a bomb. Effective immediately, Bennett Global would be conducting a comprehensive review of Crestwood International Properties. This would include an examination of management practices, promotion histories, and the attribution of key projects over the past several years. Employees were encouraged to speak openly and candidly. Confidentiality would be protected. No one would face retaliation for honesty. Ethan read the email 4 times, and with each reading, a different memory rose up to accuse him. The phased development strategy that saved the 40-story deal, Olivia's idea, presented as his. The affordable housing initiative he'd been praised for, Olivia's idea, presented as his. The shopping center conversion, the record-breaking lease, the financing restructure, hers, hers, hers. All of it whispered to him over coffee delivered by him to standing ovations. And now there was going to be a review, an examination of the attribution of key projects, and the woman conducting that review was the one whose ideas he had stolen. Ethan's hands were shaking as he set down his phone. For years, he had felt secure in the knowledge that Olivia would never expose him, because Olivia had no reason to, because Olivia benefited from his success too, because Olivia was his loyal, quiet wife who supported him. But Olivia was no longer his wife, and Olivia was no longer quiet. And Olivia now had every reason in the world and every ounce of power required to bring the entire false structure of his career crashing down on his head. He needed to talk to her. He needed to explain. He needed to, what exactly? Apologize. Beg. Remind her of the good years when there had been good years before he'd let his own ego rot everything. He didn't know. He only knew he couldn't sit still. He went to her office. The executive suite on the top floor had been quietly transformed overnight. Where the old ownership had kept a sterile, intimidating space, there were now signs of someone actually working. The door to the chairwoman's office was open. Ethan stood outside it, his heart pounding, and he watched Olivia through the doorway. She was reading a report, a pen in her hand, making notes in the margins, with the same quiet focus he had seen 1,000 times at that little desk in their living room and never once thought to wonder about. He knocked softly on the doorframe. Olivia looked up. Her expression didn't change. "Mr. Caldwell." "Olivia." He stepped inside without being invited, then caught himself aware suddenly that he no longer had the right to walk into her space uninvited. He stopped just past the threshold. "Can we talk?" She set down her pen. "About what?" "About." He gestured vaguely, helplessly. "About all of this. About yesterday. About." He ran a hand through his hair. "Olivia, I didn't know. If I had known, if you had known," she repeated softly. "That's the part I want you to sit with Ethan. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently." "That's not—" "It's exactly what you meant." She wasn't angry. That was the thing that unnerved him. She wasn't raising her voice, wasn't crying, wasn't doing any of the things he could have handled. She was just calm and clear and utterly certain. "You would have treated me with respect if you'd known I owned $150 billion, which means the respect was never about me. It was about what I could do for you. That's the whole problem, Ethan. That was always the whole problem." He had no answer for that. Because she was right, and some small buried part of him knew she was right and hated that she was right. "I supported you," Olivia went on, and now for the first time a thread of something raw slipped into her voice. "For 8 years. Every idea you brought home stressed and beaten down, I helped you carry it. Every strategy you presented to your bosses, half of them came from that little desk you never once asked me about. Do you remember the 40-story deal? Ethan's blood ran cold. "Olivia?" "The phased development structure," she said. You were going to lose the deal. You paced the living room cursing for an hour. And I told you phase it into 3 stages. Bring in early revenue from phase 1. Let the bank see 3 manageable risks instead of 1 enormous one. She tilted her head. You told me I didn't understand these things. And the next morning you walked into your boss's office and presented my idea as your own brilliant insight. And you got a bonus. And they called you one of the sharpest strategic minds in the company. Every word was a nail. Ethan stood there and took each one because there was nothing else he could do. I didn't mind, Olivia said. That's what I need you to understand. For 8 years I didn't mind. I gave you those ideas freely because I loved you, because I believed we were a team, because I thought you'd never be so cheap as to actually believe you'd done it all alone. She stood up from her desk. But you did believe it, Ethan. You believed it so completely that you started looking down on me for having nothing, when the truth is you had nothing without me. You just never knew it. Ethan's legs felt weak. He reached out and gripped the back of a chair. I'm sorry, he said, and the words felt like broken glass in his mouth because he could not remember the last time he had said them and meant them. Olivia, I'm sorry. She studied him for a long moment. I believe you're sorry you got caught, she said quietly. I'm not sure yet whether you're sorry for what you did. Those are very different things. Time will tell which one you are. She sat back down and picked up her pen. You can go now, Mr. Caldwell. He didn't move. What are you going to do to me? Olivia didn't look up. I haven't decided, she said. But I promise you this. Whatever I decide, it won't be about revenge. My grandmother taught me better than that. She made a note in the margin of the report. Though I understand if that's hard for you to believe, revenge is probably what you would do in my position. She glanced up at him, and there was something almost sad in her eyes. That's the difference between us, Ethan. You always assume the worst of people because it's what you do yourself. Ethan walked out of her office in a daze. He barely remembered the elevator ride down. He kept hearing her voice. You had nothing without me. You just never knew it. It circled in his head like a vulture. For the first time, Ethan Caldwell began to seriously consider a terrifying possibility. Not that his wife had been secretly rich. He could almost make peace with that. The possibility that haunted him was worse. It was the possibility that everything he believed about himself, his talent, his brilliance, his hard-earned success, might be a lie. That he might be underneath all the confidence and all the expensive suits a fraud. A man who had borrowed his entire life from a woman he was too arrogant to see. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the apartment that had once been theirs, the apartment that was supposed to be his prize, his freedom. And he looked at that little desk in the corner, and for the first time in 8 years, he really looked at it. The reports stacked neatly, the notebooks filled with her handwriting. He picked one up. He opened it. Page after page of analysis, market projections, development strategies, financing structures, ideas, dozens of them, hundreds in Olivia's careful hand. Some of them dated years ago, ideas he recognized, ideas he had presented as his own, and ideas he had never used at all. Ideas that were better than anything he had ever come up with on his own, sitting there in a notebook in his living room, unread, unnoticed for years. Ethan closed the notebook and put his head in his hands, and something in his chest, something hard and proud that he had carried his whole life, cracked. The next morning, the review began in earnest. Bennett Global brought in an independent team. They interviewed employees at every level. And here is what Ethan did not anticipate, could not have anticipated, because it required understanding people as more than tools, which he had never done. The employees talked. They talked freely. They told the truth, because for the first time in years, someone in power had promised to listen and had actually meant it. And the picture they painted of Ethan Caldwell was not the picture Ethan had of himself. Grace, the junior analyst from the lobby, was one of the first to be interviewed. She sat across from the review team, nervous, and then she remembered the woman in the navy suit who had helped her pick up her papers, the woman who had said someone is finally going to listen, and Grace found her courage. She told them about the market analysis she had spent 3 weeks building, the one that identified an underpriced commercial district ripe for development. She told them how she had brought it to Ethan excited, and how Ethan had taken her report. thanked her curtly, and how 2 weeks later she had watched him present her analysis to the executive board word for word, chart for chart, and take full credit for it. She told them how he had never once mentioned her name, how when she had gently raised it with him afterward, he had told her in a tone that made her feel 2 inches tall that this is how things work, and if she wanted credit, she should learn to play the game better. She was not the only one. A project manager named David came forward. He described a development timeline he had personally salvaged, working nights and weekends, only to have Ethan sweep in at the final presentation and accept the praise, while David sat in the back of the room. Ethan had never even thanked him. An assistant named Rebecca came forward. She described being screamed at publicly for a mistake that was not hers, while Ethan protected his own reputation by making her the scapegoat. One by one they came forward, not out of vengeance, out of relief, out of the simple human need to finally be seen. And it was all documented. All of it. Every stolen idea, every crushed employee, every moment Ethan Caldwell had built himself up by tearing someone else down. It went into a file. And that file landed on the desk of the woman he had spent 8 years insulting. Olivia read it all. Every page. And as she read, her jaw tightened and her eyes grew cold because it was worse than she had imagined. She had known Ethan was arrogant. She had known he stole ideas because he had stolen so many of hers. But she had not fully understood the scale of it. She had not understood how many people he had stepped on, how many talented, hardworking men and women had been silenced, dismissed, and erased so that Ethan Caldwell could look brilliant in a boardroom. She thought about her grandmother's letter. "You hold enough power to burn his whole world to the ground." Her hand hovered over the phone. It would take one call. One call to legal, one call to HR, and Ethan Caldwell would be finished. Terminated for cause, his theft documented, his name unhireable in the industry, everything he had built or pretended to build gone in an afternoon. Her fingers touched the phone, and then she stopped, because she remembered the rest of the letter. Power does not reveal who you are. It reveals who you choose to become. Choose better than he did. Olivia pulled her hand back. She closed the file, and she sat for a long time staring out at the city her grandmother had built, wrestling with the 2 people warring inside her. The wounded woman who wanted him to hurt the way he had hurt her, and the woman her grandmother had raised her to be. That evening she called someone, not legal, not HR. She called Grace. The young analyst answered on the second ring, startled to hear from the chairwoman directly. Olivia asked her one question. "The market analysis you did, the one that was taken from you, do you still have your original work? The dated files? The drafts?" "Yes," Grace said, hardly daring to breathe. "I saved everything. I always save everything because I learned the hard way that around here, if you can't prove it's yours, someone will take it." "Good," Olivia said softly, "because starting tomorrow, that's going to change. Everyone who had their work stolen is going to get their name back on it, publicly, in the record. I'm going to make sure of it." A pause. "And Grace, I read your analysis, the full thing, the original. It's excellent. Better than excellent. I'd like you to come work directly under me, as a real analyst, with a real title and real credit for your real work. Would you be interested?" There was a silence on the line. And then very quietly the sound of a young woman crying, the kind of crying that comes not from sadness, but from being seen for the very first time. "Yes," Grace whispered. "Yes, thank you, thank you." Olivia hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of her office, and she realized that this small moment, lifting one overlooked person, felt more powerful than any act of revenge ever could. Her grandmother had been right. Anyone can destroy. The rare ones build. But she was not done with Ethan, not by a long way. Because Olivia had made a decision. She was not going to fire him. That was too easy. That was too quick. Firing him would let him walk out the door and tell himself a story that he'd been wronged, that his vindictive ex-wife had abused her power to punish him, that he was a victim. He would never have to actually face what he'd done. No. Olivia had a different lesson in mind. The next day, Ethan was called to a meeting. Not with Olivia, with the head of human resources and a member of the review team. His hands were sweating as he walked in. He was certain this was it. The end. The firing. Instead, the HR director slid a document across the table. "The review is complete," the man said. "The findings are extensive. Mr. Caldwell, I'll be direct with you. Based on what we've documented, the company would be within its rights to terminate your employment for cause effective immediately with the theft of intellectual property noted in your permanent record." Ethan closed his eyes. Here it was. "However," the HR director continued, "the chairwoman has decided otherwise." Ethan's eyes snapped open. "What?" "You will not be terminated," the man said. "You will be retained, but your role is changing. Effective immediately, you are removed from your position as Regional Development Director. Every project you claimed over the past 4 years is being reviewed and where warranted reattributed to its actual authors. Their names go into the record. Yours comes off." He slid another paper across. "You will be reassigned to a junior support role reporting to the very department you used to lead. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly. And every 90 days, your work, your actual personal, unassisted work, will be evaluated by the chairwoman's office." Ethan stared at the papers. He didn't understand. "She's not firing me." "No." "Why not?" The HR director hesitated, then said almost gently, "I asked her the same thing. She told me firing him lets him leave as a victim. Keeping him makes him face the truth every single day." He gathered his own papers. "She said, and I'm quoting her, 'some men only learn when they can't look away.'" Ethan sat in that chair for a long time after the meeting ended. He was not fired. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt something far more disorienting. He understood slowly what Olivia had done. She had not destroyed him. She had done something far more devastating. She had held up a mirror, and she was going to make him look into it every single day for as long as he stayed. Every morning he would walk into the building that his ex-wife owned. Every project he touched would be watched. Every idea he had would have to be genuinely his, because there was no Olivia at home anymore to whisper the brilliant answers over coffee. He would sit in the department he used to lead, taking direction, doing the small work, the unglamorous work, the work he had spent his whole career avoiding by standing on other people's shoulders. And everyone would know. Everyone would know why. The mighty Ethan Caldwell brought low, not by scandal, not by a dramatic firing, but by the quiet, patient justice of the wife he had thrown away. For the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell understood what it felt like to be powerless, to be small, to be the one looking up. He walked out of the office that day a different man than the one who had walked in the day before, certain he was untouchable. As he passed through the lobby, he saw Grace, the junior analyst, walking the other way, except she wasn't a junior analyst anymore. She was carrying a box of her things toward the executive floor, and there was a lightness in her step he had never seen, and when she passed him, she didn't lower her eyes the way she used to. She looked at him. She held his gaze. And then she walked on, promoted, credited scene, while he shuffled toward a desk in the department he used to rule. Ethan understood in that moment the full shape of what was happening. Olivia was not just lifting the people he had crushed. She was lifting them in front of him so that he would have to watch the rise of everyone he had held down and understand at last exactly how much talent he had wasted, how many people he had wronged, how much of his own success had been theft. He stopped in the middle of the lobby, the same lobby where 3 days ago he had strode in like a king, and he felt the weight of it all press down on him until he could barely breathe. Up on the top floor in an office that had once belonged to her grandmother, Olivia Bennett, stood at the window and looked out over the city. Grace's box of belongings sat on a new desk just outside her door. The review file sat closed on her own desk, its work done. And somewhere far below in a department he used to command her ex-husband was learning the first lesson of a very long education. Diane Foster's words came back to her. You could destroy his entire career with a single phone call. She could have. She hadn't. And yet as she stood there, Olivia felt no peace, because there was a question underneath all of it, a question that had begun to trouble her from the moment she inherited this terrible, magnificent power, and it grew louder every day. She had chosen not to destroy Ethan, but keeping him, watching him suffer, arranging his humiliation day after day. However deserved, however just, she could not entirely silence the small voice that asked whether even that was mercy, or whether it was simply a slower, more elegant form of the very thing her grandmother had warned her against. She looked down at the letter still on her desk. Choose better than he did. Was she? Or was she just choosing to punish him more quietly, more patiently, and calling it justice? Olivia Bennet, chairwoman of a $150 billion empire, the most powerful person in the building, stood alone at the window with all the power in the world in her hands, and for the first time, she was not sure she knew how to use it. The question haunted Olivia for exactly 11 days. And then on the 12th day, something happened that forced her to answer it. She was reviewing the reattribution files when her assistant knocked and told her there was a man in the lobby demanding to see her. Not requesting, demanding. A man named Harold Voss, who had introduced himself as a member of the board of Bennett Global and who was apparently extremely angry. Olivia set down her pen. She knew the name. Harold Voss had been on her grandmother's board for 2 decades. He was old money, old power, one of those men who believed a company was run by men like him and merely owned by whoever held the paper. He had not come to her grandmother's funeral. He had sent flowers and a card, and then he had begun quietly making calls. "Send him up," Olivia said. Harold Voss walked into her office without waiting to be invited the same way Ethan once had, and Olivia noted the similarity with a cold little flicker of recognition. He was a large man in an expensive suit, and he did not sit. He planted himself in front of her desk and looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he intends to solve. "Miss Bennet," he said, "I'll be brief. This review you're conducting, these reattributions, this is not how a company of this size operates. You're creating chaos. Morale is a mess. The executives are terrified. And frankly, you're exposing us to enormous legal liability by putting all these admissions of theft into the record." He leaned forward, planting his knuckles on her desk. "Your grandmother, God rest her, built this company on discretion. You're tearing it apart in your first month over what hurt feelings a junior analyst who didn't get a footnote." Olivia looked at his knuckles on her desk. Then she looked up at him. "Take your hands off my desk, Mr. Voss," she said quietly. He blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me." For a moment he didn't move, testing her. Then slowly he straightened up and removed his hands, and Olivia saw the flicker of surprise cross his face. The surprise of a man who had expected a grieving young woman he could steamroll and had found something harder underneath. "Sit down, Mr. Voss," she said, "since you're here." He sat, reluctantly. "You said I'm doing this over hurt feelings," Olivia said. "Let me correct you. I'm doing this because a company that lets talented people be robbed by the loudest man in the room is a company that is slowly poisoning itself. You call it discretion. I call it rot. My grandmother built this company on discretion, yes, but she also built it on knowing exactly who her people were. She watched everyone, Mr. Voss. She watched you." Olivia let that sit for a beat. "I've been going through her private files. She kept notes on every board member. Would you like to know what she wrote about you?" Harold Voss went very still. "I thought not," Olivia said. "So let me be clear about the balance of power in this room since you seemed confused about it. I am not a grieving girl you can manage. I own a controlling interest in this company, which means I don't need the board's permission to conduct a review. I need the board's cooperation to make it pleasant. Those are 2 very different things, and you just chose which one you're going to get." The board member's face had gone red. "You're making a serious mistake. There are people on this board who have been managing the real operations of Bennett Global for years while your grandmother played gardener. We can make your position very difficult." And there it was, the threat out in the open. Olivia felt something cold and clear settle over her. This was not Ethan. This was bigger than Ethan. This was the real machinery of the empire she'd inherited, and it was showing her right now in her first month whether it intended to obey her or manage her. "Mr. Voss," she said, "I'm going to tell you something my grandmother told me. The moment people believe you have nothing, they show you exactly who they are." She stood up slowly, and now she was the one looking down at him. "You came in here believing I have nothing, no experience, no allies, no idea how this company works. And you've just shown me exactly who you are. Thank you for that. It saved me weeks." Harold Voss stood too furious now. "This isn't over." "No," Olivia agreed. It isn't. I'll be reviewing your division next, Mr. Voss. Personally, I suggest you make sure everything in it is exactly where it should be. She walked to her door and opened it. You can find your own way out. You know this building better than I do. For now. He stormed out, and Olivia closed the door and stood against it and let out a slow, shaking breath, because for all her calm, her heart had been pounding the entire time. She had just declared war on the most powerful faction on her own board in her first month with almost no allies. She had never felt more alone, and she had never been more certain her grandmother would have done exactly the same thing. 2 floors down, Ethan Caldwell was learning what humility tasted like, and it tasted like ashes. He sat at a small desk in the corner of the development department, the department he used to run, and he did the work that was assigned to him by a manager 15 years his junior. The manager was not cruel about it. That was almost worse. The young man was polite, professional, and completely unafraid of Ethan, which told Ethan more clearly than any insult could exactly how far he had fallen. The whispers followed him everywhere. He heard them in the break room, in the elevator, in the sudden silences, when he walked into a meeting. That's him. That's Caldwell. He's the one who... His wife owns the company. She demoted him. He stole all those projects. Can you believe it? He walked through a fog of them every day. And every day, he had to watch the people he had once crushed begin to rise. Grace was the hardest to watch. She was flourishing. She had an office now, a real one, on the executive floor. She led her own small team. Her market analyses, the ones Ethan had once stolen and now no longer had access to steal, were being implemented across 3 states. He passed her sometimes in the halls, and every time she looked at him with an expression that was not triumph, not gloating, but something far more humbling. Pity. She felt sorry for him. And Ethan, who had spent his whole life above people like Grace, could not bear to be pitied by them. One afternoon, exactly 3 weeks into his demotion, Ethan reached his breaking point. He had been assigned to compile a financial summary grunt work, the kind of thing he used to hand to interns. And he sat down to do it, and he realized with a sick, dawning horror that he wasn't sure he could. The formulas that structured a complex development financing package, the real technical, unglamorous knowledge of the trade, he had never actually mastered it. He had never had to. He had always had someone beneath him to do it, or a wife at home to figure it out. He stared at the spreadsheet for 2 hours and produced almost nothing. And in those 2 hours, Ethan Caldwell finally understood the full and terrible truth about himself. He was not brilliant. He had never been brilliant. He was a man who had learned early that if you spoke with enough confidence and took credit for enough of other people's work, the world would call you a genius. And he had believed it. He had believed his own performance so completely that he had built an entire identity on a foundation of nothing. He put his head down on the desk in the middle of the department he used to lead, and he did something he had not done since he was a child. He wept. Nobody comforted him. Nobody even noticed, or if they did, they chose not to see the way he had once chosen not to see them. He wept alone, quietly, and when he was done, he wiped his face, and he made a decision that surprised even him. He was going to actually learn, not to save his career. He was fairly certain his career was already over, but because for the first time in his life, he could not stand the man he had discovered himself to be, and the only way he could think of to change it was to become slowly, painfully, someone who actually knew what he was doing. He stayed late that night. He pulled up training materials the junior staff used, and Ethan Caldwell, former regional development director, one of the sharpest strategic minds in the company, sat alone at a small desk and taught himself the basics of a job he had pretended to master for years. It was the most honest thing he had done in a decade. Meanwhile, Olivia's war with the board was escalating fast. Harold Voss had not been bluffing. Within a week, Olivia began to feel the resistance. Documents she requested came slowly or incomplete. Meetings were scheduled and then quietly sabotaged. A story appeared in an industry publication unsourced, suggesting that the new chairwoman of Bennett Global was inexperienced, emotional, and driving the company toward instability. It had Voss's fingerprints all over it, though of course nothing could be proven. Olivia understood this game. They could not remove her. She owned too much. But they could make her look incompetent, isolate her, and slowly, patiently wait for her to make a mistake big enough to justify wresting real control away from her. It was exactly what they had done to her grandmother, she realized, in the final years when Margaret had grown old, and they had assumed she was fading. Except her grandmother had been watching the whole time. Her grandmother had let them believe they were winning right up until they weren't. Olivia did not have her grandmother's decades of preparation. She had to move faster, so she did something bold, something that made even Diane Foster, whom she had brought in as legal counsel, go pale. She called a full board meeting, and she walked in with a single folder, the folder of her grandmother's private notes on every board member, and she set it on the table and she did not open it. "I know what some of you are doing," she said, looking around the table, letting her eyes rest on Harold Voss last and longest. "I know about the leaks, the stalled documents, the little maneuvers, and I want to be very clear. My grandmother knew about all of you. She knew who was skimming, who was self-dealing, who was cutting side arrangements with our competitors." She tapped the closed folder. "It's all in here. Every one of you has a page, and I have read them." The room was silent. Several board members had gone white. "I'm not going to open this today," Olivia continued, "because today I'm giving you a choice. You can continue to fight me, in which case I will open it, and I will hand it to the appropriate authorities, and some of you will not simply lose your seats. You'll lose a great deal more than that." She let that hang. "Or you can do your jobs. Cooperate with the review. Let me clean up this company the way my grandmother would have wanted, and your pages stay closed." Harold Voss found his voice, though it was not as strong as before. "You're bluffing. That folder could be empty." Olivia looked at him, and then she opened the folder to a single page, turned it around, and slid it across the table to him. Only to him, so that only he could read it. Harold Voss looked down at the page, and whatever was written there, the color drained from his face entirely, and his hand, when he pushed the paper back, was trembling. "That's your page, Mr. Voss," Olivia said quietly. "Would you like me to read the others aloud, or shall we all get back to work?" Nobody said a word. "Good," Olivia said, closing the folder. "Then let's talk about the future of this company." She walked out of that meeting having done in one afternoon what she had feared might take years. She had not defeated the board with money, or with lawyers, or with force. She had defeated it the way her grandmother would have, by knowing exactly who everyone was, and by having the patience to wait until the moment they revealed it. That night, alone in her office, Olivia finally allowed herself to shake. The pressure of it, the sheer terrifying scale of what she was carrying, crashed over her all at once. She was 34 years old. A month ago, she had been a woman signing divorce papers, being called decoration by a man across a table. Now she held the fates of thousands of employees and billions of dollars, and a company her grandmother had spent 60 years building, and she was fighting a war on every side, and there was no one she could lean on. She thought about Ethan. Isn't that strange, she thought. For 8 years, whatever else was wrong, she had at least had someone to talk to at the end of the day. Even if he never asked about her work, even if he took her ideas, there had been another person in the house, another voice, another presence. Now there was no one. She had inherited an empire and lost the last person who had shared her days all in the same week. She did not miss Ethan. She was clear about that. But she missed not being alone. The thought unsettled her, and she pushed it away, and she went back to work. The next morning brought the twist that changed everything. Olivia's assistant came in with an unusual message. Someone had requested a private meeting. Not a board member, not an executive. It was Ethan. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was why. He said, her assistant relayed carefully, he said it's not about his job. He said he found something you need to see, something about the company. He said it's important, and he said, and I'm quoting him, tell her I'm not asking for anything. Tell her this is the first thing I've ever done for her instead of for myself. Olivia sat very still. Every instinct told her it was a manipulation, a trick, a desperate man's last attempt to worm his way back into her good graces. That was who Ethan was. That was who Ethan had always been. But some other instinct quieter made her say, send him up. Ethan walked into her office, and Olivia's first thought was that he looked different, thinner, older. The confident swagger was gone entirely, and in its place was something she had never seen on him in 8 years of marriage. Uncertainty. humility. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and was not sure how to put himself back together. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. He didn't sit until she gestured for him to. Another change. "You said you found something," Olivia said, keeping her voice neutral, "about the company." "Yes." He put a folder on her desk. His hands, she noticed, were steady, but there was a tension in him, the tension of a man doing something frightening. Since the demotion, I've been doing the actual work, the financial summaries, the ground-level analysis, the stuff I never used to touch." He swallowed. "And a week ago, I was reconciling some development financing figures in the division that reports up through Harold Voss, and the numbers didn't add up." Olivia's attention sharpened. "At first I thought I was making a mistake," Ethan went on. "Because honestly, Olivia, I'm not good at this. I've been finding out just how not good at this I am, so I assumed the error was mine. I checked it 4 times. He opened the folder and turned it toward her. "It's not mine. There's money moving out of 3 development projects into shell entities. Small amounts spread out structured to look like ordinary vendor payments, but when you total them across 4 years." He pointed to a figure at the bottom of the page. "It's not small anymore." Olivia looked at the number. It was enormous. "Voss," she said quietly. "Voss," Ethan confirmed. "And at least 2 others whose names are on these authorizations. They've been skimming from the company for years. And here's the thing, Olivia." He met her eyes. "The reason nobody ever caught it is that catching it requires someone to actually do the boring ground-level financial work that the executives all thought was beneath them, including me, especially me. I ran that division for years and I never would have found this because I never actually did the work. I just took credit for it." A bitter, self-aware laugh. "It took getting demoted to the bottom for me to finally learn enough to see it." Olivia stared at him. This was the twist she had not seen coming. Not from anyone, and least of all, from Ethan. "Why are you bringing this to me?" she asked. "You know I could still fire you. You know I demoted you. You have every reason to want this company to fail. Bringing me proof that Voss is stealing, that helps me. It doesn't help you at all." Ethan was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that Olivia would remember for a long time. "For 8 years, he said you gave me ideas that made me look brilliant, and you never once asked for credit. You just gave them to me because it was the right thing to do, and because you cared more about the outcome than about who got the glory. I never understood that. I thought you were being weak. I know now you were being something I never was in my whole life. You were being decent." He closed the folder gently. "I don't expect this to fix anything. I know it doesn't undo what I did. But when I found this, I asked myself what you would do, not what would help me, what would be right. And the answer was to bring it to you." He stood up. "So I brought it to you. That's all. I'll go back to my desk now." He turned to leave. "Ethan," Olivia said. He stopped. "This is real?" she asked. "You're certain? Because if I move on Voss with this, and it's wrong, he'll destroy me." "It's real," Ethan said. "I checked it more carefully than I've ever checked anything in my life, because I knew this was the one time it couldn't be about me looking good. It had to actually be right." A pause. "That's a new experience for me. Turns out it's harder." And despite everything, despite all of it, Olivia almost smiled. "Thank you," she said. Ethan nodded once and left. Olivia sat alone with the folder for a long time. The evidence in it was exactly what she needed. Harold Voss had been the most dangerous obstacle in her path, and now, thanks to the most unlikely source imaginable, she held the thing that would remove him. Not with a bluff about her grandmother's notes, but with hard, documented, undeniable proof of a crime. But that was not what she sat thinking about. She sat thinking about the man who had brought it to her, the man who 3 weeks earlier would have used a discovery like this as a weapon, a bargaining chip, a way to buy back his old position. "What would you want in exchange?" the old Ethan would have asked, sliding the folder halfway across the desk and pulling it back. That Ethan had been incapable of doing a single thing without calculating what it would get him. This Ethan had asked for nothing, had explicitly refused to ask for anything, had done the right thing simply because it was right, and had told her without shame that he had learned how from her. People could change. Olivia had never fully believed that before. She had believed it in theory the way you believe in things you read about but have never seen. But she had never watched it happen up close in a person she knew to the bone. And now she was watching it. Slowly, painfully, imperfectly, the most arrogant man she had ever known was becoming someone she did not entirely recognize. And it complicated everything. Because it is easy to know what to do with a villain who stays a villain. You defeat him. You move on. But what do you do with a man who is actually genuinely trying to become better? What does justice look like then? What does mercy look like? Where is the line between forgiving what should be forgiven and excusing what should never be excused? Olivia did not have an answer. Her grandmother's letter did not have an answer. Power reveals who you choose to become, it had said. But it had said nothing about what to do when the person who wronged you was right in front of your eyes choosing to become someone new. She moved on Voss the next morning. It was swift and it was surgical. Olivia brought the evidence to an emergency board session, laid it out with Diane Foster and the company's forensic accountants, and gave Harold Voss no bluff this time, no closed folder, no choice. Just the truth, documented, undeniable. The shell entities, the routed payments, the forged vendor authorizations. 4 years of theft laid bare in front of the board he had ruled for 2 decades. Harold Voss did not go quietly. He shouted, he threatened lawsuits, he accused Olivia of manufacturing evidence of a vendetta of everything. But the numbers did not lie, and everyone in that room could see the numbers, and one by one the board members who had backed him began quietly to slide their chairs away from his. By the end of the meeting, Harold Voss was finished, removed from the board, his seat forfeited, his theft referred to the authorities. The most powerful obstacle in Olivia's path gone in a single morning, brought down not by her power or her money, but by the boring, honest, ground-level work of a demoted man at a corner desk 2 floors below. When it was over, the remaining board members looked at Olivia with something they had not shown her before. Not resentment, not condescension. Respect edged with a healthy fear. She had walked in a month earlier as a grieving woman they intended to manage. She had just dismantled their most powerful member with proof they could not dispute. They understood now that they were dealing with Margaret Bennett's granddaughter in every way that mattered. Olivia went back to her office and closed the door, and she should have felt triumphant. She had won. The war for control of her company was, if not over, then decisively turned in her favor. Instead, she found herself thinking again about Ethan, about the strange, unfamiliar thing she was feeling toward him, which was not love. She was certain it was not love, but which was not nothing either. It was something more like witnessing, the feeling of watching a person you had written off do the one thing you never believed they could do. She picked up her phone. She almost called him, to thank him properly, to tell him what his information had accomplished. She set the phone back down. Not yet, she told herself. Because there was still a question. She had not answered the question that had haunted her from the beginning, and now haunted her more than ever. She had kept Ethan close as a lesson, a punishment, a mirror he could not look away from. She had told herself it was justice. But if he was truly changing, then at some point that arrangement stopped being justice and became something else. At some point, keeping a reformed man in a state of daily humiliation stopped being a lesson and started being cruelty. Where was that point? Had she passed it already? Was she even now holding on to her power over him, not because he needed the lesson, but because some wounded part of her still wanted him to hurt? Choose better than he did, her grandmother had written. Olivia looked out over the city her family had helped build, the city that now in so many ways belonged to her. She had defeated the board. She had exposed the thief. She had lifted the people who had been crushed. By every measure of power, she had won everything. And she still did not know if she was becoming the woman her grandmother had believed she could be, or simply a more powerful, more patient version of the man she had divorced. The two were not as far apart as she wanted them to be. And that, more than the board, more than Voss, more than anything, was the truth she now had to face. The answer to that question came from the last place Olivia expected. It came from Ethan himself, and it came in the form of a refusal. 2 days after Harold Voss was removed, Olivia made a decision. She would restore Ethan. Not fully, not to his old position, but she would end the demotion. She would give him a real role again, a fair one with credit for his own work. It felt right. He had found the theft. He had done the honest thing. He had earned a way back, and she admitted only to herself it would relieve the small, nagging guilt she had carried about keeping a changing man in a state of daily humiliation. She called him to her office and offered it to him. A director-level position in the Financial Oversight Division, the very kind of work that had let him catch Voss. Good salary, real authority, real credit, a second chance. And Ethan said no. Olivia was so surprised she thought she had misheard him. No, Ethan said again gently. Thank you, Olivia. I mean that, but no. I don't understand, she said. This is what you wanted. This is everything you spent your whole career chasing. A director title, real authority. I'm offering it to you. I know. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. And a month ago, I would have grabbed it with both hands and never let go. I would have told myself I deserved it. He looked at her. But I don't deserve it, Olivia. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You'd be giving it to me. Same as you gave me your ideas for 8 years. And I'd be taking it same as I always took. And in 6 months, I'd have convinced myself I earned it because that's what I do. That's the disease. I take things people give me, and I call them mine. Olivia stared at him. This was not the answer of the man she had married. So what do you want? She asked. I want to earn something, Ethan said simply. For the first time in my life, I want to build something that's actually mine, not borrowed, not handed to me by the woman I spent 8 years insulting. He gave a small, rueful smile. You know what the worst part of these last weeks has been? It hasn't been the demotion. It hasn't been the whispers. It's been finding out that I don't know who I am without a title propping me up. I've been Ethan Caldwell director for so long that I forgot to ever become just Ethan, and I need to find out if there's anything there, on my own, not with your help. Olivia sat back slowly. You're turning down a director's position to stay a junior analyst. I'm turning down a director's position, Ethan corrected, to go find out what I'm actually worth, which right now might be nothing. That's a real possibility. But I'd rather find out the truth than take another loan against a version of myself that doesn't exist. And in that moment, Olivia had her answer to the question that had haunted her for weeks. She had wondered whether keeping Ethan close was justice or cruelty, whether he was truly changing or merely performing. And here was the proof, unmistakable, undeniable. A man performing change takes the promotion and calls himself reformed. A man actually changing turns it down because he understands at last that being given things was the very poison that ruined him. Ethan Caldwell had just refused the one thing he had wanted his entire life, not out of pride, out of humility, and that was how Olivia knew it was real. All right, she said quietly. Then what will you do? I don't know yet, Ethan admitted, but I've been thinking. All those reattributions you did, giving people back credit for their work. It made me realize how many people out there get erased, get stepped on, get told their contribution doesn't count. I used to be the man doing the stepping. He paused. I'd like to spend some time being on the other side, helping people who get overlooked. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but it's the first thing I've ever wanted that wasn't about making myself look bigger. Olivia looked at him for a long moment, and she felt unexpectedly a lump rise in her throat. Because somewhere in the ruins of the man she had divorced, something new was growing, and it was the very thing she had loved in him once long ago, before success had rotted it out. Decency, humility, the capacity to see other people. You've changed, she said quietly. I'm trying to, Ethan said. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, and I'm doing it too late to save my marriage, and I know that, and I've made my peace with it. He stood up. I didn't do any of this to win you back, Olivia. I need you to know that. I know it's over. I lost you in that conference room when I called you decoration, and I lost you 100 times before that, in 100 ways I was too blind to see. I'm not changing to get you back. I'm changing because I can't stand to be who I was. He walked to the door. You deserved so much better than me. I hope you find it. And he left. Olivia sat alone in her office for a long time after that. And she cried quietly, though she could not have entirely explained why. Not because she wanted him back. She didn't. That door was closed, and she knew it was closed, and she did not want to open it. But there is a particular grief in watching someone become too late, the person they should have been all along. A grief for the marriage that could have been if he had been this man from the start. A grief for the 8 years she had given to a man who only learned to see her after she was gone. Some things she understood now could not be rebuilt. Some wounds went too deep and cost too much. Forgiveness was possible. Reconciliation was not. And those two things she was learning were allowed to be separate. But even as she grieved, Olivia felt the question that had haunted her finally dissolve. She had wondered if she was becoming her grandmother's granddaughter, or a quieter version of the man she'd divorced. Now she knew, because a small, patient version of Ethan would have kept him in that corner desk forever, savoring his humiliation, calling it justice. And she did not want that. Watching him refuse the promotion, watching him choose the hard road, she felt no disappointment that her mirror had lost its power to punish him. She felt glad that he was becoming better, glad even at the cost of her own revenge. That was the answer. You knew you had become a good person, not by whether you had the power to hurt someone, but by how you felt when they stopped deserving to be hurt. And Olivia felt only relief. She wiped her eyes and picked up her grandmother's letter one more time. Power does not reveal who you are. It reveals who you choose to become. She understood it fully now in a way she hadn't before. It was not a warning only about villains. It was a promise about everyone. The power was a mirror, and it showed you what you already were. But it also, if you let it, showed you what you might become. Ethan had looked in the mirror and for the first time hadn't liked what he saw and had decided to change it. And she had held the mirror steady, and then when it was time had lowered it and let him go. That, she thought. That is what my grandmother meant. But Olivia's own battle was not over, because inheriting power, she was discovering, was not a single test you passed once. It was a test you took every single day. In the weeks that followed, she threw herself into the company with a new clarity. The Voss scandal, painful as it was, had cleaned out the rot at the top and freed her to reshape the company in her own image and her grandmother's. And as she went deeper into the empire she'd inherited, she began to see something that troubled her. Bennett Global was worth $150 billion, and nearly all of it was luxury. Luxury towers, luxury developments, luxury properties built for people who already had everything in a country where millions of families could not find a stable, affordable place to live. The company had grown enormous by serving the wealthy, and in doing so, had quietly become part of the very machine that priced ordinary people out of their own cities. Her grandmother had built it that way. Margaret Bennett had been a woman of her time, and her time had rewarded luxury. But her grandmother had also left her a letter about becoming something better than the people who came before, and Olivia began to wonder if that instruction applied to the company itself. She raised it in a board meeting, and the pushback was immediate and fierce. "Affordable housing has thin margins," one board member said. "We'd be trading guaranteed returns for social projects that barely break even. The shareholders will revolt." "We don't have public shareholders," Olivia said mildly. "I own a controlling interest. There's no one to revolt except this board. And I'd like to understand why a company sitting on $150 billion is afraid of a project that breaks even instead of one that triples our money." "Because that's the business we're in," another director said. "We build luxury. It's what we're good at. It's what your grandmother built." "My grandmother," Olivia said, "built a company that could do anything it chose to do, and she left it to me with instructions to become something better than what came before. I intend to honor that." She looked around the table. "We're going to keep building luxury. It funds everything. But we're going to take a portion of every luxury development, a real portion, not a token, and we're going to reinvest it into affordable housing, mixed income communities, real homes for real families in the same cities where we build our towers for the rich. And we're going to do it not because it's profitable, but because we can, and because a company this powerful has a responsibility beyond its own bank account." The room was silent. It was not, she could tell, a comfortable silence, but it was no longer a defiant one. Harold Voss's downfall had taught them what happened to those who fought Olivia Bennett. And more than that, some of them, the better ones, were beginning to be moved by her the way people are moved by someone who actually believes in something. The Affordable Housing Initiative launched 3 months later. And it was Olivia's entirely and undeniably hers, the first great thing she had built with her own vision and her own power. She named it the Margaret Bennett Communities Program after the woman who had made it possible. And here the story took a turn that no one, least of all Olivia, could have predicted. Because the program needed someone to run the ground-level work. Someone who understood development, but who cared more about people than about profit. Someone who knew from the inside how the powerful overlook the powerless. And when the search began, one name kept surfacing quietly from an unexpected source. It came from the nonprofit sector. Ethan, it turned out, had left Crestwood entirely a few weeks after refusing Olivia's promotion. He had gone to work for a small nonprofit that helped families facing eviction find stable housing. He had taken an enormous pay cut. He had started at the bottom again, doing unglamorous work again. But this time, he had chosen it, and by all accounts, he was good at it. Not because he was brilliant, but because for the first time in his life, he was actually trying to help someone other than himself. The nonprofit's director, who had no idea about Ethan's history with Olivia, had reached out to Bennett Global about a possible partnership. And in praising the partnership's potential, she had mentioned her most dedicated staff member, a former corporate executive who had shown up one day asking to volunteer and had never left a man who worked longer hours than anyone and asked for no credit and seemed, she said, almost driven to make up for something. His name was Ethan Caldwell. When Olivia read that name in the partnership proposal, she set the paper down and sat very still for a long moment. Life, she thought, has a strange sense of symmetry. The man who had spent his career stealing credit for affordable housing initiatives he never understood was now genuinely doing the real work of housing the poor and asking for no credit at all. The man she had lifted her whole marriage was now lifting others. The mirror she had held up to him had done its work, and he had walked into a new life through it, and now that new life was circling back impossibly to meet her own. She had a choice to make. She could keep her distance, route the partnership through intermediaries, never have to see him, never have to navigate the enormous complexity of working professionally with the man she had divorced. It would be the safe choice, the clean choice, or she could do the harder thing. Olivia thought about her grandmother. She thought about the letter. She thought about the woman she was trying to become, the one who built instead of destroyed, who lifted instead of crushed, who saw the value in people that others missed. She picked up the phone and told her assistant to arrange a meeting with the nonprofit, in person, and to make sure their lead staff member on the housing initiative attended. 3 weeks later, Ethan Caldwell walked into a Bennett Global conference room for a partnership meeting, not knowing that the chairwoman herself would be there. When he saw Olivia at the head of the table, he stopped dead in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rest of the room, unaware of the history between them, waited politely. "Mr. Caldwell," Olivia said, and there was something in her voice that was not cold, not warm, but honest. "Thank you for coming. I understand you've been doing remarkable work." Ethan recovered himself. He took his seat. And over the next hour, Olivia watched him present the nonprofit's needs, the realities of the families they served, the gaps in the system, the ways a company like Bennett Global could actually make a difference if it was willing to do more than write a check. And he was good. Not slick, not performing, just knowledgeable and passionate and real. He knew the families by name. He knew their stories. He cared in a way the old Ethan had never cared about anything but himself. When the meeting ended and the others filed out, Olivia asked him to stay a moment. "You didn't know I'd be here," she said. "No, I would have prepared myself." A pause. "Not because I didn't want to see you, because I did. Too much, maybe. I've spent a lot of these weeks trying not to think about you and doing a very bad job of it." Olivia let that sit. "The work you're doing, it's real. I checked. You're not doing it for show." "There's no one to show," Ethan said. "That's kind of the point. Nobody at that nonprofit knows I used to be somebody. Nobody cares that I once had a corner office. It's the first place I've ever worked where the only thing that matters is whether you actually helped somebody today." He looked down at his hands. "I've never been happier, Olivia. Isn't that strange? I lost everything I spent my whole life chasing. The title, the money, the marriage. And I've never been happier, because for the first time I know exactly who I am. And it's not a fraud. It's just a guy trying to do something decent." Olivia felt her chest tighten, because this was the man she should have married. This was the man who had been buried under 8 years of ambition and arrogance, the man she had glimpsed only in fragments, the man who had finally, painfully, at enormous cost, dug his way to the surface. And it was too late. For them, it was too late. And they both knew it. "I want to work with your nonprofit," Olivia said. "Not as a token partnership, as a real one. The Margaret Bennett Communities Program is going to build affordable housing across the country, and I want people who care about the families more than the margins running the ground-level work." She met his eyes. "That means working with you, professionally. Are you able to do that? Because if it's too painful, I'll understand and I'll route it around you and no one will ever know why." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I can do it," he said finally, "because it's bigger than us. It's bigger than what we were, or what we could have been, or what we lost. You're talking about housing families who have nowhere to go. If I can be part of that, then yes, I can stand to be in a room with you." A small, sad smile. "I've stood far worse. I've stood being the man who didn't deserve you. This is easier than that." And so it began. Not a reconciliation. Never that. But a strange, unprecedented kind of partnership between a woman who had inherited the power to destroy and had chosen to build, and a man who had wielded a small, cruel power his whole life and had lost everything, and in the losing had finally become someone worth knowing. They did not fall back in love. This is important and true, and Olivia would have insisted on it. The marriage was over, and it stayed over. Some wounds do not close, and the wound of being called decoration across a divorce table by a man who took 8 years of your brilliance and called it his own, that wound does not simply heal because the man got better. It scars, and you carry the scar, and you do not go back. But they built something. Together and separately in the strange orbit they now shared, they built something that mattered more than the marriage ever had. Because the marriage had been two people, one blind and one unseen. And this was two people who finally saw each other clearly at last, with all the illusions burned away, and who took that clear sight and pointed it outward toward families who needed homes, toward a country that needed less greed and more decency, toward a legacy larger than either of them. Months into the work, on a long evening after a difficult day, Ethan said something to Olivia that she would carry for the rest of her life. "I spent years thinking I was better than you," he said, "because I couldn't see what you carried inside. I looked at you, and I saw someone small, because I was too small myself to see anything else. And the cruelest part is I lost the one person who ever truly believed in me, and I lost her because I was too arrogant to respect her." He looked at her across the table, this woman he had wronged so deeply, this woman who had every right to destroy him, and had chosen instead to let him become someone new. "I don't want you back. I know I don't get that. I gave that up. But I need you to know that you were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid to know it until I'd thrown it away. And I'm sorry, not so you'll forgive me, just because it's true and you should hear it at least once from me." Olivia was quiet for a long moment. "I accept your apology," she said finally, and she meant it. "I forgive you, Ethan. I do. Not because you've earned back what you lost. You haven't, and you never will, and I think you know that. But because carrying anger toward you was a weight I no longer want to hold. So I'm setting it down. Not for you, for me. That's more than I deserve, more than I—" "Yes," Olivia agreed, and there was even almost a hint of warmth in it. "It is, but my grandmother taught me that what people deserve and what you choose to give them are two different things, and that the second one is where you find out who you really are." They sat with that, the two of them, in a companionable silence that would have been unimaginable a year earlier when he was signing divorce papers with a smile and she was holding a sealed envelope that would change both their lives. And somewhere in that silence was a peace that was better than reconciliation, deeper than romance, larger than revenge. It was the peace of two people who had walked through the fire of who they were and come out, both of them, as someone better on the other side. Olivia thought about her grandmother's letter one last time that night on the drive home. Power does not reveal who you are. It reveals who you choose to become. She had inherited $150 billion and the power to destroy a man who had hurt her. And she had chosen instead to build, to lift, to forgive, to become. And in doing so, she had done something her grandmother would have understood completely, and that Ethan was only now beginning to learn. She had discovered that the greatest power in the world is not the power to make someone fall. It is the power to help someone rise, including sometimes the very person who once tried to make you small. 2 years passed, and the world Olivia Bennett had inherited was no longer the world her grandmother had left her. The Margaret Bennett Communities Program had become the largest privately funded affordable housing initiative in the country. It had broken ground in 14 cities. It had put roofs over the heads of tens of thousands of families who a few years earlier had been one missed paycheck away from the street. And it had done something no one on that old board had believed possible. It had made Bennett Global not just wealthier, but respected in a way that all the luxury towers in the world had never managed. People trusted the name now. Families whispered it with gratitude instead of resentment. A company that had once been part of the machine pricing people out of their cities had become, under Olivia, part of the machine putting them back in. But that is not where this story ends, because the greatest transformation was not in the buildings. It was in the two people who had started this whole thing across a divorce table, one holding a pen with a cruel smile, the other holding a sealed envelope she had not yet opened. Olivia had become, by any measure, one of the most powerful women in America. And yet the thing people noticed most about her was not her power. It was how little she needed to display it. She ran the largest real estate empire in the country, the way her grandmother had run it quietly, watching lifting the overlooked, and every so often, when it was truly necessary, revealing a strength that stopped a room cold. The board that had once tried to manage her now followed her without question, not out of fear, though there was some of that, but out of something closer to devotion. She had cleaned out the rot. She had exposed the thieves. She had made the company mean something. And they knew, all of them, that they were working for someone rare. Grace, the junior analyst who had once dropped her papers in the lobby and been helped by a stranger in a navy suit, was now the youngest vice president in the company's history. She sat on the leadership team. Her name was on major developments across 3 states, and she had never forgotten the woman who had told her someone is finally going to listen. She told the story to every new hire. She told it as a promise. In this company, she would say, "Your work is yours. Your name stays on it. That's not how it used to be, but it's how it is now." And she would point always to the woman at the top who had made it so. The people Ethan had once crushed had risen, every one of them. David, the project manager whose timeline Ethan had stolen credit for, now led his own division. Rebecca, the assistant, Ethan had screamed at and scapegoated, had gone back to school on a company scholarship and become a project coordinator. And she was formidable, and no one screamed at her anymore because no one dared. Olivia had not just removed the man who crushed them. She had spent 2 years deliberately, patiently lifting every single person he had held down until the entire culture of the company had turned inside out. The loudest voice in the room no longer won. The best work did, and the difference in the building was something you could feel the moment you walked in. As for Ethan Caldwell, his transformation was the one nobody who had known him in the old days could quite believe. He had left the corporate world entirely. There was no going back for him, and he no longer wanted to go back. He had risen within the nonprofit world, not because he chased titles he had learned his lesson there for good, but because he was genuinely deeply good at the work, and the work was helping families that everyone else had given up on. He ran the ground operations for the Margaret Bennett Communities Program, now the on-the-street in the neighborhoods knock on the door and sit at the kitchen table work of actually getting families housed. He knew hundreds of them by name. He knew their children. He showed up to the ribbon cuttings and stood in the back, and when the cameras came, he stepped out of frame because the credit belonged to the families and to the program, and to Olivia and Ethan Caldwell at long last had learned the difference between doing something great and needing everyone to know you did it. He had built something that was truly his, not borrowed from a wife he was too blind to see, not stolen from an employee he was too arrogant to credit, not inherited from anyone, earned. Every bit of it earned in the sweat and the failure and the slow, humbling work of becoming a decent man in the second half of a life he had nearly wasted being a small one. And here near the end comes the twist that no one saw coming, least of all the 2 people it happened to. It happened on an ordinary afternoon at a housing development in a rough part of the city, one of the program's largest projects, a mixed-income community with hundreds of new homes rising where a decaying industrial lot had once sat. Olivia had come for a site visit. Ethan was there as he always was in the middle of things. And a family was moving into one of the first completed units, a mother and 3 children who had spent the last 2 years bouncing between shelters and a relative's cramped apartment. Olivia watched from a distance as Ethan handed the mother the keys. She watched the woman's face crumple, watched her pull her children close, watched her turn to Ethan and try to speak and fail too, overcome to get the words out. And she watched Ethan, this man she had married and divorced, this man who had once called her decoration, kneel down to the level of the woman's youngest child, a little girl of maybe 5, and say something to her that made the child laugh through the whole family's tears. And Olivia felt something crack open inside her chest that she had spent 2 years keeping carefully shut. Later, when the family had gone inside their new home, Olivia found Ethan standing alone, looking up at the building. "You did that," she said. "We did that," he corrected. "You built it. I just carried the keys." "No." Olivia shook her head. "The man I married would never have knelt down to talk to that child. He wouldn't have seen her. He would have handed over the keys, shaken the mother's hand for the photo, and been thinking about his next meeting the whole time." She looked at him. "I've been watching you for 2 years, Ethan. I keep waiting for the old you to come back, the one who calculates, the one who performs, and he never does. He's just gone." "He's not entirely gone," Ethan said quietly. "I still hear him sometimes, in my head, the voice that says, make sure they notice, make sure you get the credit, make sure you look good. I hear him almost every day." He gave a small, tired smile. "But I don't obey him anymore. That's the difference. He's still in there. I just stopped letting him drive." Olivia was quiet for a moment, and then she asked the question she had been not asking for 2 years. "Do you ever regret it?" she said. "Not us. I know you regret us. I mean everything. The career, the money, the life you had. You gave it all up. And now you're doing the hardest, least glamorous work there is for a fraction of what you used to make. Do you ever wish you could go back?" Ethan thought about it. He didn't answer quickly, and Olivia respected that because the old Ethan had never once had to think before answering, had always had a confident reply ready for everything. "No," he said finally. "And I'll tell you the honest reason, even though it doesn't make me look good because I've stopped worrying about looking good." He turned to face her. "The man I used to be had everything and felt nothing. He had the title and the money and the corner office, and he was empty, Olivia. Completely empty. He didn't even know he was empty because he'd never felt full, so he had nothing to compare it to. He thought that hollow, hungry feeling was just how life felt. That's why he kept chasing more. More money, more status, more recognition. He was trying to fill a hole that couldn't be filled that way." He looked back up at the building, "And then I lost all of it, and I hit the bottom. And down there at the bottom with nothing, I found the thing I'd been starving for my whole life, and it wasn't a title. It was this. Being useful to someone who actually needs it, being part of something bigger than my own ego." He shook his head slowly. "So no, I don't regret it. I'd sign those divorce papers again. Not to lose you, God, not that, but to become this, because the man who signed those papers the first time was going to die empty and never know why, and the man standing here is for the first time in his life actually alive." Olivia felt the tears come, and this time she did not fight them. Because here was the deepest truth of the whole story, the one her grandmother had understood and left for her to discover. The divorce papers Ethan had signed, believing they were his greatest victory, his freedom, his triumph over a woman he thought was beneath him, those papers had turned out to be the single most valuable thing that ever happened to him. Not because they set him free, because they destroyed him. And in the ruins of the man he had been a better man had finally been able to grow. The document he signed to throw her away had become the document that saved his life. He had thought he was leaving behind an ordinary woman. He had been walking away from the most powerful person he would ever know. And in doing so, in falling as far as a man can fall, he had finally found the only thing worth having, which was not power at all. "My grandmother would have liked you," Olivia said quietly, "the way you are now, not the way you were." A small, watery laugh. She would have despised the way you were." "I would have deserved it," Ethan said. They stood there together for a while in front of the building full of families who had homes now because of the strange, painful, redemptive road the two of them had traveled to get to this exact spot. And no, they did not get back together. This is the truth of it, and it matters because too many stories lie about this. The marriage did not resume. There was no dramatic reunion, no kiss in the rain, no falling back into each other's arms. That would have been a smaller ending, and their story had grown too large for a small ending. Some things once broken are not meant to be put back together in the same shape. And Olivia had learned over 2 years that forgiveness and reconciliation are different countries, and you can travel all the way to one without ever setting foot in the other. What they became instead was something the language does not have a good word for. Not spouses, not friends exactly, though there was friendship in it. Not partners in the romantic sense, though they were the truest partners either of them had ever had. They were two people who had wounded each other and healed each other, who had seen each other at their absolute worst and had chosen both of them to become their best, and who now stood side by side, pointed in the same direction, building something that would outlast them both. There was a kind of love in it, but it was not the kind that shares a bed. It was the kind that shares a purpose. And in its own way, it was deeper than the marriage had ever been, because the marriage had been built on illusion, and this was built on the truth, all of the truth, the very worst of it, finally faced and finally forgiven. Olivia went home alone that night, and she was not lonely, though she was alone. She had learned the difference between those two things over 2 years. She had built a life of her own, full and rich, and entirely hers. She dated eventually. She would, in time, find a partnership of the romantic kind with someone new, someone who saw her from the very beginning as the powerful, brilliant woman she had always been, someone who never had to lose her to learn to value her. But that is a different story, and it belonged to a future beyond this one. For now, she was content. She had inherited an empire and a terrible power and a wound that ran to the bone, and she had turned all three into something good. She sat that night as she often did with her grandmother's letter, the one she had opened in a conference room 2 years earlier, while the man across the table gloated over papers he thought represented his victory. The paper was soft now, worn from handling. She knew every word by heart, but she read it anyway one more time. Power does not reveal who you are. It reveals who you choose to become. Choose carefully. Choose better than he did. And Olivia understood at last the full and final meaning of it.